Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unexpected Goals, the podcast. This is your Champions League quarterfinal first leg preview. Boy, oh boy, do we have four incredible matches coming up on Tuesday and Wednesday, all on CBS and Paramount Plus. It's, it may not, I was thinking about this the other day. It may not be, the high profile days of Messi and Ronaldo, but there are some many interesting tactical dilemmas and things going on in these four matches that it's going to be so fascinating to watch them all play out. And we're going to start with, I think, the most interesting match of the four, Arsenal and Real Madrid. Um, Arsenal has Bukayo Saka back. The last he played in the second half against Fulham, and then 45 minutes against Everton over the weekend. And I think what you're going to see Arsenal do more of, and what they're going to try and exploit from Real Madrid, is something similar to what Manchester City did. And Manchester City, what they were able to do is, because Real Madrid's two front forwards don't do a lot of defensive work, specifically Kylian Mbappe, it allows easy passes in through the middle. And so what Manchester City was doing to Real Madrid was they were creating, 5v3 overload in the middle, and they were asking a lot of questions of not only Real Madrid's two pivot midfielders, but also their center backs, whether they're going to jump up and then whether they're going to close that space down. So we saw Arsenal against Everton. If you didn't check it out on my Substack, I did a tactical review of Everton versus Arsenal. It's, obviously Arsenal rotated a lot of their guys, but some of the aspects of what Mikel Arteta was doing against Everton's 4-4-2 low block is kind of similar to what you're going to see here against Real Madrid. What he was trying to establish was a box midfield. He was using a lot of fluid rotations to try and pull a lot of Everton's defenders out of position. Everton just stuck to their zonal principles, and Arsenal really just couldn't find a way through the middle. And they obviously were trying to get the ball out wide. And eventually, as the match went along, they were trying to send in crosses and being a little more aggressive. But it was a very low risk approach from Arsenal. They were trying to maintain their rest defense. They were trying to not allow Everton to break on them, which they were very successful in doing, because Everton did nothing from open play and they got a cheap penalty at the beginning of the second half. But that, I think, is what you're going to kind of see here from Arsenal: a low risk approach in possession, creating wide overloads. I included a picture from in my Premier League notes article on my Substack that showed how Real Sociedad was able to maintain 4v3s and 4v2s through the first and second phases of build-up. They were able to find passing triangles through the middle and actually kind of exploit Real Madrid. Those are the similar aspects of what Arsenal can actually do here, because they have those fluid rotations, because guys can interchange positions, and if you try to stick to man-to-man principles, that can really pull guys out of position. So that is what you need to look here for Arsenal: is, are they going to try to create that box midfield? Are they going to try to create a midfield overload, or are they going to favor the right side of the pitch? Are they going to have Odegaard and Moreno or Rice or whoever's playing in that right midfielder role, and have them try and play an overload with Bukayo Saka's end of the pitch? I don't know if Ferland Mendy's going to play in this match. We may have Camavinga out there at left back again, which is not bad. He's a very good defensive. Obviously, he's incredible defensively. So interesting tactical dilemma here from Arsenal, and how risky do they go here? Because we know Mikel Arteta, because of what he does with those wide overloads, it's a low risk approach, because if you lose the ball there, then you're not really going to get exploited through the middle. So that is the dilemma that Arsenal has. How aggressive do you get here in this first leg with your passing and trying to open Real Madrid up? Now, from Real Madrid's perspective, I find it interesting to see what they're going to do. Now, they said we're building up against Sociedad, even though Sociedad was pressing them really intensely. Obviously, Sociedad was trailing by a goal on aggregate, so they had to press right out of the gates. And Real Madrid had a couple different ways to exploit the man-to-man press. They did a couple ball circulations to pull guys out of position, but really they were utilizing Jude Bellingham and Vinicius Jr. in build up to cause Sociedad some problems. So Bellingham was, obviously playing a little bit more centrally, but he dropped out wide and asked questions of whether Sociedad's center back is going to follow him all the way out there. He didn't, so he's able to easily receive the ball, and Real Madrid's able to progress the ball to the left side of the pitch. Vinicius Jr. is constantly dropping deep and pulling a fullback with him. He's usually able to easily receive the ball in those positions, because what tends to happen, if you're a fullback defending Vinicius Jr. and you overcommit, he can just plant his foot and he can just hightail it and burn you over the top. It's happened so many times with fullbacks that want to try to jump him. So he is able to receive the ball pretty easily if once he drops deep there. And once he drops deep, he honestly a lot of times what he did against Sociedad was he was just send a switch ball over the way out to Vasquez and just create like almost a transition opportunity for Real Madrid going forward. So very interesting tactical dilemma here because I got to be honest, outside of Barcelona, I don't think that Real Madrid has faced a pressing team as good as Arsenal, at least through this whole Champions League run. I mean, you could say Atalanta, I guess, but Arsenal is so good. Outside of Bournemouth, they have the second most danger zone losses forced in the Premier League. They're obviously an incredible mid and low block team that it's a very difficult team to defend. So we'll see if Real Madrid tries to build out against them, or do they take the low risk approach and they just rely on their forwards to try to win duels, which is something that really doesn't happen against Arsenal. Against Everton tried that approach, and Arsenal won the duels battle 37-20. Like they completely dominated Everton. So, not saying that, Everton is even close to Real Madrid, but Real Madrid's forwards are certainly not as physical and as big as Arsenal's defenders are. So, if they can't win those 1v1 duels and they want to take a low risk approach, it might be a bit of a struggle for Real Madrid. All right, Bayern Munich versus Inter. Some injuries heading into this fixture for Bayern Munich, and very important ones. Jamal Musiala tore his hamstring against Augsburg on Friday. He'll be out for an extended period of time. He is a huge loss for Bayern because what Bayern does in possession, they build up in their 2-4-4, and Musiala is the main central creator that Bayern Munich has. If you look through their roster, they really don't have another central creator. It's a lot of wingers. So who is going to play that central creator role? I mean, I guess it probably would be Thomas Mueller is the easiest answer, but he is obviously much older now and way past his prime, and certainly is not the ball carrier that Musiala is. And it's also very difficult to play through Inter's 5-3-2. Now, what the 2-4-4 buildup does is it allows Bayern Munich to have an outstanding rest defense so that when they do lose the ball, they're able to easily counterpress the opponent and suffocate them. That's why Bayern's defensive numbers are so good. That's why they hold so much possession. That's why they have some of the best underlying metrics across Europe. I mean, plus 50 expected goal differential in the Bundesliga through 28 matches. That's insane. So, how do they actually break Inter down here? Because Inter this season, between the Champions League and Serie A, is only allowing 0.84 non-penalty expected goals. And since the calendar turned to 2025, Napoli is the only team to create over 1.5 expected goals against Inzaghi's side. So, for Bayern, they're going to have to probably send a lot of crosses. Harry Kane is nursing an ankle injury right now, too. So they're probably going to have to target him in the box. I don't think they're going to be able to play through the middle. So it's going to be a lot of their wingers being isolated, trying to win 1v1s out wide, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They obviously have a ton of outstanding wingers that can do that. But again, you're not going to have an overload over the last line if you're doing a 2-4-4. So look for Bayern to try to control this match. Obviously, them being at home early on, it might actually be kind of a slow match. It might actually be kind of low event early on here. Now, there were some question marks in the middle of the season for Bayern. They had a performance against Celtic where they created zero point 0.7 expected goals. They had a performance against Leverkusen where they only took one shot for the entire match. But essentially, over I'd say the last about month and a half or so, they're averaging 2.58 expected goals per 90 minutes. And against Leverkusen over the two legs, they did create five expected goals. So not going to sit here and be like, oh my gosh, Bayern, can't do it. They obviously can. They obviously have individual quality to be able to do it. I'm just saying, I don't think they've faced a 5-3-2 low block as good as Inter this season yet. And for Inter in possession, I think this is probably one of the worst matchups for Bayern because I mentioned the 2-4-4 buildup. What is the one main weakness of that if you are able to get outside the rest defense? It's balls out wide. It's pretty simple, right? And what has been happening for most of the season for Bayern is Upamecano and Kim Min-jae have just been cleaning up and being really good at winning 1v1s when they get in those type of situations. Well, Upamecano is out. That means Eric Dyer is going to have to start at right center back, and Inter aggressively pushes their fullbacks up the pitch. Dumfries is injured, but look for DiMarco on the left side. They're definitely going to push him way up the pitch very aggressively and look for him to sending crosses to Ram and Martinez. And the other aspect that's really underrated about Inter is, you know, they don't dribble the ball, which I know sounds stupid, but among Europe's top five leagues, they are averaging the least amount of successful take-ons per 90 minutes. One of the best teams in Europe just doesn't dribble the ball. They aggressively pass the ball up the pitch because, the reality is a lot of teams play go man to man. Bayern is one of them. And if you're going man to man, you get a lot of 1v1s. So what Inter does is once they win the ball and they are able to transition, they do it very, very quickly and they look to hit teams with a lot of progressive passes and balls over the top. And they're one of the best teams in Europe at actually doing that. So if you're able to hit teams quickly, suddenly Bayern's rest defense that they have around Inter becomes null and void because Inter's not going to dribble the ball. They're going to immediately look to release their fullbacks or release Thuram or release Martinez out there and let them go win a 1v1, which they can absolutely do here against Bayern. So I think it's a pretty bad matchup, honestly, for Bayern Munich. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Inter take a lead going into the second leg. All right, those are Tuesday's matches. Wednesday, PSG versus Aston Villa. PSG's probably the best team in the world right now. Yeah, I would say so after what they did to Liverpool. Over the two legs, it was obviously 1-1 on aggregate. Expected goals were 1.98 for Liverpool and 5.33 for PSG. That's what they did to Liverpool. And in the second leg, I think it's important to note how they were able to exploit Liverpool. Now, if you look at some of the stats from the match, Liverpool did force 39 danger zone losses in the second leg, which is a substantial amount. And it's something that I've, been saying about Enrique's team for a long time is that when they play elite pressing teams, they kind of tend to struggle. Well, one of the aspects that he did in that second leg to allow PSG to get out because in the first 10 minutes Liverpool was pressing very intensely and PSG really could not find a way out. So what he did is Dembele was playing as a false nine. He started dropping Dembele in deep. And so what that did was created a 4v3 against Liverpool. And the first goal, or the only goal, obviously, in the second leg, was Dembele able to drop deep, create the 4v3. They were able to play a progressive pass right to him. He's able to turn and run right at Liverpool's back line because Liverpool, Van Dijk and Konate didn't really want to step up and try to mark him. So what tends to happen then is you have an incredible ball carrier and passer just running at you, and then you have Barcola and Kvaratskhelia just making runs in behind. So, now is that going to happen here against Aston Villa? I think the tactical battle is actually kind of interesting. It could, honestly, because Aston Villa obviously wants to play a very compact 4-4-2 mid block. They want to condense the space in between the middle. They don't want to let you play through centrally. But what that does is it's a high line, and obviously you can play balls in behind. So when Enrique wants to build up in a 2-3-5, he wants to create a five-man central overload. And when you're facing a 4-4-2, that asks a lot of questions of the two forwards. Are they going to cover? Are they going to actually press? Are they going to allow them time and space on the ball? Because if you allow them time and space on the ball, you have, Barcola, Kvaratskhelia, or Dembele, whoever's playing on the wingers, you have them isolated 1v1. And so when the false nine is dropping in centrally, now you're asking a question of the center back. Does he come and mark him? Does he allow space for those two guys to make the run behind and play a direct ball over the top? When PSG played Brest early on here in the Champions League, that's what they just did repeatedly. Brest was playing a high line and they just isolated, Barcola and Dembele, and they just punished them over and over and over again. So I think this is really, really difficult for Aston Villa to actually defend, honestly. And I'm not sure there's really a team, I would say, a team left in this competition that could defend this. I think would be Inter or Arsenal would be the only two teams that could actually truly defend what PSG is doing right now. They've already wrapped up Ligue 1, so they can start resting guys for the remainder of the season if they so choose to do that. But it's going to be very, very difficult here for Aston Villa to actually keep them in check. Now, for Aston Villa in possession, I think this is a terrible matchup for them. And it's because Unai Emery's build-up patterns can get pretty predictable. They love the passing triangles out wide to get the ball back centrally, create something going forward. Against Brighton, Brighton forced 11 high turnovers against them. And if you look at the location of where those high turnovers happened, it's like a mirror image of where PSG is trying to, or excuse me, where Aston Villa is trying to build up. They lose them wide out left. They lose them in the left, left half space centrally, which is where you're, trying to get the ball back and get it going forward. So PSG is an elite pressing team. They will come at you very, very with a lot of intensity. Which against Liverpool, it kind of forced Liverpool to go along quite a bit. PSG only had 17 danger zone losses in that match. But Unai Emery is of the school of thought where you know we are not playing the ball long. We are going to play through them no matter what. And when your build-up patterns can get a little predictable, teams can be able to prepare for you and they can take away the things that you're trying to do. So don't be surprised to see Aston Villa turn the ball over quite a bit high up the pitch here against PSG. And honestly, I think it's just an awful matchup for them. Final match, probably the most fun one, I would say, of the four. Barcelona and Dortmund. These two met during the league phase, ended 3-2, ton of chances at both ends. Niko Kovac, though, I think things have changed for Dortmund. Niko Kovac has transformed Dortmund into a powerhouse. And the biggest problem that Dortmund had under Nuri Sahin was they were just way too aggressive with their pressing, and it left their backline exposed way too many times. And he would always tell his center backs to push up and try and win the ball, and it just left them completely exposed. A good example from the previous meeting is, it didn't lead to a goal, but Dani Olmo just drops in centrally here, and Barcelona is able to play a risky pass through them, which is what they do. They love to play risky, aggressive passes. That's what Hansi Flick wants them to do. He's able to get the ball. The center back is late getting there, and he is able to turn and just play a ball in behind Yamal. And it's like pretty simple. Now, Dortmund is playing more of a 4-4-2 mid block now. They're not pressing as high, as aggressively. Mid blocks are like a death sentence against Barcelona because Barcelona is so aggressive with their passing, they can play those balls in behind, or they can play through you, or they can, create a central midfield overload and, pull your center backs out of position and allow, Yamal to make a run in behind. Like it's a very, very difficult thing to defend. And, the match that came to mind, and if you want an example of what it's like to play a mid block against Dortmund, Valencia tried that a long time ago, and it ended 7-1, and they just got completely dismantled. And a good example from that, is Barcelona. Obviously, we know about the central overloads by now, right? But an underrated aspect of it is what the central overload does is once because with teams playing so compact and just trying to make sure that you are not able to play the ball through centrally, you leave Balde, because usually Rafinha will invert more towards the central of the pitch to create that overload. Balde will push up on the left and Yamal will stay wide on the right. And so you have those guys usually are isolated 1v1 against fullbacks. Or, in the case that I'm showing you right now on my YouTube channel, it's Balde getting the ball and having a free cross into the box. And because you already have so many guys centrally, those guys are able to crash the box. And a lot of times you have numerical advantages on crosses. And so the example I'm showing you right now is Barcelona gets a 3v2 and they score. So there's just so many different things that Barcelona can do, and it makes them so impossible, quite frankly, to defend. That's why they're averaging 2.4 expected goals per 90 minutes this season. But for Dortmund, under Niko Kovac, they are so much better offensively because they're being more aggressive. I went through and looked at the data. So under Niko Kovac, they're averaging 2.58 expected goals per 90 minutes. That's their 8 Bundesliga matches. Compare that to what they were under Sahin. They're only averaging 1.44. Progressive passes per 90, 55.7 under Kovac, 43.6 under Nuri Sahin. Dortmund is being much more aggressive in possession with their passing. And one of the aspects that they're really doing and doing it very successfully is they're trying to overload the last line of defense and not necessarily playing direct balls in behind, but using their forwards to drop deep and create space for usually Guirassy to make a run in behind. That happened against Lille. The image I'm showing you right now on my YouTube channel. Had a 3-1-6 against them. They dropped a guy in deep, and what it did was created space for Guirassy to just make the run in behind, drew the penalty, and eventually Dortmund scored on that. Now, that's what they can do here against Barcelona because Barcelona plays such a high line and they ask their center backs to jump. And, when one jumps, the line has to push up. There's just so much space in behind for allow Dortmund to make those runs. And they did that effectively in the previous meeting. They did create 2.7 expected goals. So this is going to be a really fun, high event type match. And it's just going to be, probably 3-2, 3-3, something like that. And we'll go to the second leg and we'll probably see something similar. So that is your Champions League quarterfinal preview. I'll be back on Thursday for your Premier League Match Week 32 preview, and then also back next week for another Champions League quarterfinal preview. Thank you all for listening, and enjoy the Champions League quarterfinals.